So the poet that I have is Sylvia Plath, and she was born in Massachusetts in the early 1930s. Her father died when she was 8, and that's when she initially started writing. And within that same year, she was a published author. She grew up without her dad, and eventually she went off to college in Massachusetts. And not only was she a really good student there, she did really well academically. She was also really happy. There was a note that she sent her mother that was very poetic, yet very optimistic. And it read, "The world is splitting open at my feet like a ripe, juicy melon." She was offered a job in New York as an editor of a magazine, and she took it, but it wasn't exactly what she was expecting. And when she came back from that job, she was a completely different person. And one of her boyfriends at the time was quoted in saying that it was her whole life was that job. And she hated it. And after that, she was on a downward spiral. So after that, Sylvia Plath started cutting at her legs to see if she had the courage to actually kill herself. Her first suicide attempt was her junior year in college, and she took a bunch of sleeping pills, and supposedly she crawled under her house, or her mom's house, and was found there. After she got help and completely recovered and got everything that she needed settled and all that, she met her husband in college at Cambridge, and they eventually got married and had 2 children. They were married for a while, and then they began to kind of fall apart and separate. And so after her marriage ended, she was completely heartbroken because he had left her for her friend. In the 1960s, early 1960s, 62, 63, her and her 2 children were living in a flat in London, and it was a very, very cold winter, and Sylvia was sick. Her kids were, well, could you imagine being alone, watching your 2 kids being psychologically imbalanced with no husband, no support. So after those years, she began to write because she had so much going on in her head. She just had to get it down on paper. After 1962, she was broke and had no money, and she attempted suicide and tried to drive her car off the bridge into a river, and she was unsuccessful. In her last few works, she talks about death and suicide, and ultimately in 1963, she was successful and she killed herself with the assistance of a gas stove. Sylvia's style is extremely emotional and extremely dark. She talks about morbid things, just casual things, and she makes them sick. Her poetry came from her own depression and her incredible case of mental illness. She's not your average writer. She's dealing with a lot of psychological issues and has a lot of material to work with because it's right there in her head. She uses a method of shocking her audience when she plays with some disturbing situations. One example is in one of her poems called Cut, and it's, quote, "What a thrill, my thumb instead of an onion," quote. In this particular poem, she expresses the excitement that she got when she accidentally sliced her thumb open. The article that I am going to be summarizing is titled Viciousness in the Kitchen. And the article says that during the 50s, Sylvia Plath writes a lot of her poems about the domestication of women, and that in the 1950s, domesticity was a political issue. As she gives her words, she as in Sylvia Plath, this is what the article is saying, that she uses her words to express what she thought of the expectations of women at that time. She challenges the view of the happy housewife and twists the everyday duties done by the women. She also makes the chores that the ladies do seem more mentally aggressive and makes them seem more odd and more there's more emotion to them and more, I don't know what the word is. She really does challenge femininity and surprises her audience with quirky and kind of morbid things that she says. Sylvia Plath also uses what they call colloquial vocabulary, which is how everyday people talked in her time period. Sylvia Plath is trying to expose what domesticating a woman, a human, does to them, does to the individual. The article also includes how she used certain word choices to imply that domestic women are imprisoned by their husbands, like they have no say in anything and are expected to behave according to the men's standards and will. The article also touches on some of her other pieces that have this similar topics and about women and all that good stuff.